Jules.
Hey.
Here we are. Episode 99.
I know.
Which
crazy.
technically, because we had an episode 0, which was the very first setup episode we've ever done, this is actually our 100th episode.
I know.
It's hard
That's
to
kinda
celebrate
fun.
episode 99, right? We're going to celebrate episode 100.
Oh, yeah. We're going to do something really fun. And at that time, hopefully, I'll be off the holiday wagon and won't be so hurt.
There you go. There you go.
Damaged.
Yeah, damaged. So I I'm like stunned, by the way, that we've done that many episodes. Like,
I
think
know.
about that.
I know.
Like, where people are like, aren't you worried you're going to run out of drinks? No, we'll never, ever run out of content.
No.
As long as we want to keep doing this, we can talk about cocktails. There's so many stories and so many drinks to talk about. So,
Have you ever seen that the Paul Rudd skit where he goes, look at us. Who'd have thought? Not me. Look at us. That's us. That's it. Who'd have thought? 100 episodes.
Who'd have thought? Yeah, we're still at it.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of episodes, today, what do we get into? Today, we're going to talk about the banana old fashioned.
Ooh, and the espresso old fashioned.
The espresso old fashioned. So you put a nice
Yes.
little riff on that program, which
Riffy
why
do.
not?
I'm
Yeah.
coining that term. I love that.
You are. We've
yeah.
riffy-dooed a lot.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people share their riffy doos on the Insta. It's been really fun that we all agree it's a riffy do. I love it.
Yeah. I'm like just floored by the way that we're getting all this engagement.
I know.
And
I
like
know.
people are like starting to recognize you for the podcast.
I know.
Instagram
Well,
handle.
I was outside of the grass skirt here in San Diego for their holiday pop up, and somebody was like, "Hey, do you do the podcast with your uncle?" I was like, "Do you listen? Like, what? This is crazy." It was hilarious. It's good to hear that people are enjoying our happy hour time because you never know. We're just looking at each other on a screen.
We're just looking at each other, kind of screaming into a dark hallway.
The void.
Yeah, the void.
Yeah.
Well, all right. So we get into that, and then today I'm going to get into the history of whiskey.
Yeah.
And a brief history of whiskey, because we could talk about whiskey forever.
Grazed the surface, but a good surface.
A good surface. Yep.
Yeah.
So we give you some context behind how it all started, where did whiskey come from, and then we'll get into whiskey in America.
Yeah.
Because naturally we're talking about the old fashioned. And then we've got tips on bitters, right, Jules? So we've talked about bitters before back in the Trinidad Sour, but you know.
Well, and as we're easing into this next season, we're here to answer your questions, but I thought to kind of kick us off, let's do some refresh on some pretty important questions. And one of those, especially as we're dealing with the old fashioned, is how do we use our bitters and why do we care so much? Because we do.
Yeah. Yeah. And look at that. Your cat wants to
And
participate.
look, Martini loves bitters so much she couldn't help it. She wanted to be a part of the show.
So, I love the fact you call your cat Martini. And then, so during the tip section, I'll also get into the drink we're going to make in 2 weeks. So
and let me just tell you, and you'll have to wait till the end of this episode to hear what the name of the drink is, but I'll just give you a hint. It's perfect for Valentine's Day.
Oh, God.
So, yeah.
It's Don rubbed off on you, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I feel like there's no rules now at this point.
No, there's no rules. Geez, I mean, I don't know if whoever listened, for those of you that listened to our last episode, the holiday bonus episode where we did not beep out any of the swears. It was like,
Yeah, no.
when we released that, I was like, oh, I'm nervous.
No. It was great. It was great. It was a good time. And this season is just getting better and better each episode. And I think that the every other week is going to be great. People can catch up and drink with us and not feel like their liver's going to give out at any moment, you know?
Yeah. All right, Jules. Well, you know what?
Why don't we make these
let's
cocktails?
give them what they want. Let's get into the cocktail.
Yeah, let's do
All
it.
right, here we go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. We've
Time
been here
for a drink.
before.
Yes.
We'll be here again. We are making our old fashioned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love it because there really are so many ways. What's that saying? There's so many ways you can skin a cat.
Skin a cat, yeah.
I hate that saying, but it's true.
Yeah. do people used to skin cats? I don't know. Like,
I
that's
don't
weird.
know.
That's so
Yeah.
morbid.
It's
You
odd.
say things and you don't really realize that, like, oh, you know what? That's really messed up.
Yeah. You're like,
Skinning
how'd
a
we get
cat.
that one? Yeah, right.
Right. Just
But the saying still holds true, especially with an old fashioned. There are so many ways you can make this bad boy.
yeah. I'm sorry. I'm kind of
You
in the
still
weeds
stuck
on
on
the
it?
skinning the cat. Yeah. So
Yeah,
there's many
sure,
ways
okay.
to do it. I
Yeah.
don't know, like maybe people are going to start getting emotional because it's just, I would hate to even think about it.
Yeah. Martini's looking at me like, what are you guys
Yeah,
talking
hey,
about?
What did you say, cat?
Here we go. Here we go. It is, there's more than one way to skin a cat is unknown of its origin, but it likely comes from the expression to skin a cat. The phrase first appeared in print. Brad, we like appeared in print in 1840 in The Money Diggers by Seba Smith.
Okay.
And it was used to explain that there are multiple ways to accomplish a task, such as digging for money. Weird.
What's a cat
I don't
have
know.
to do with it?
Okay, here are some other versions of the phrase that appeared in the 1800s. Are you ready for this?
Mm-hmm.
There are more ways of killing a cat than choking it with cream. There are more ways of killing a cat than choking it with butter.
Mm-hmm.
And there are more ways of killing a dog than choking him with pudding.
Well, okay.
So, you know what? 1800s was just a weird time. I think it was just, I don't think people were okay. They were probably really hungry at that time and maybe going a little crazy from not
So
eating or something.
some sick bastard turned that into, instead
Totally.
of indulging, let's just
Yeah,
stick,
but you
let's
want
just
to know
skin the
what's,
cat.
you know what's bizarre to me? We still have that saying.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's weird.
Well,
Okay, so-
how about we get into the drinks and get off the cat for a minute? All right, cool.
Yeah, it's a good place. Yeah, good place.
So, Jules, I am going to make the banana old fashioned, and it is such an awesome drink. And the reason it's awesome is the banana simple syrup is like just heaven for whatever reason. Bourbon and banana.
Yeah. And can I tell the audience that a little guess here? Was I the one who introduced you to the banana simple syrup?
You certainly were. You really were.
I
Yeah,
knew
that
it.
was a mind blown moment.
I knew it. Yeah, God, did we talk about that? This was pre-podcast, I think. I think we were when we were doing the.
This is years ago. Actually.
Yeah, this is a long time ago.
Yeah.
And do you keep the banana on the syrup and put it over ice cream?
No. What do
What?
you do? What? Hold
So you
on.
know when you make the syrup and you have the
Yeah.
banana slices in there,
Yeah.
you scoop out the banana slices and you top it on your ice cream.
Oh, well, that's a
Because
good
they're
idea.
because they're like candied banana slices now.
Yeah, every time I've made this, I have dreams of like, ooh, I should candy these slices now.
Yeah.
And I don't. So
Well, you know what? This time, just scoop them out with a slotted spoon, and just have your ice cream bowl ready. Make them, maybe in the evening, and then have it for dessert.
yeah.
Just
All right.
saying.
Cool.
Yeah. Anyway.
Duh.
Stop
Wow.
interrupting
Wasted
me.
opportunity. Okay. Well, so this drink uses banana simple syrup. Now, here's the deal today, folks. I'm not making my cocktail on the show. I'll accompany this with how I made it. So when you go to the Instagram, you will see like how it's made. But today, I just need a break from drinking. And
Guys,
maybe
we
you're
bo-
in dry January too, and
both
so
do,
you're probably like, "Hey, this is great. Thanks, Brad. I'm going to save this recipe until I stop my dry commitments here."
Yeah.
So, anyways, I'm just going to stop rambling on.
Yeah. As we said before, it's been a long holiday season, and we need a break. But we're going to talk to it. And Brad, I'm excited to hear how you put this together because I heard you say bourbon, and I would have thought you would have made this with rum. So
It's so good with rum. So don't get me wrong. Take that rum old fashioned I did from last season. What's that, 16, 17 episodes ago?
Yeah.
And sub in the banana simple syrup. Lights out.
Lights out.
Ladies and gentlemen. Yes.
Yeah. That actually got me excited. I'm like, wait, maybe I could have another cocktail.
I know.
Maybe I can come back from the dead here.
Yeah, I know. I hear you. Yep.
Yeah.
I'm with
Okay.
you. All right. So here we go. Banana old fashioned. Write this down. This is what you're going to want. You're going to want a double rocks glass. And for a garnish, if you wanted to make a shot at candying the banana slices, go for it. That might be fun. Or take a banana chip, like a dried banana chip that you get out of a bag from a store. throw that in your glass. You could garnish it with an orange if you wanted to. I mean, really, you could garnish it with nothing at all and just, looking pretty there in your glass with ice. But whatever you want to do, you have some freedom with the garnish. And you're going to want to make the syrup, obviously, ahead of time. So I'm going to give you the instructions for making the syrup, and then I'll give you the instructions for making the drink. Jules, I'll be curious to know how these syrup instructions jive with your syrup instructions, is the way I've always made it.
Yeah.
So what I do is I take a half a banana and I slice it up, and the riper the banana, the more flavor you're going to get from the banana. So I like a banana that's kind of got some brown on it, which makes it tough to slice up for for candied banana slices.
Yeah.
But man, it's just the banana flavor really comes through. So half a banana in your saucepan, and then a cup of sugar, cup of water. And then I heat that to a simmer and let it simmer for 20 minutes. And then I take it off the heat. And of course, I've been stirring occasionally. And once I take it off the heat, I let it come down to room temperature. And then what I do is I strain that into a not a heat safe container. I strain that into an airtight container. And if you want to use a cheesecloth to get all the particulates out of there, I recommend doing that. And then once you have that in that airtight container, just go ahead and throw it in your fridge. You got a couple of weeks with it. I'd say 3 to 4. If you want to add a shot of vodka, maybe an ounce and a half of vodka to that, you will give it a few more weeks in the fridge. But if you like this as much as I do, you're probably going to go through it pretty quickly.
Yep.
All right. So now we got our banana simple syrup.
Yeah.
Does that jive with your recipe?
Totally. Yeah. I like putting a shot of rum in there
Ooh,
after.
a shot of rum in there. That's a good idea too.
Yeah, and then it lasts longer in the fridge.
God, those two flavors go together so well.
I know.
You are a
you could
genius.
even use that, flavor with the bourbon old fashioned. Just because you put a shot of rum in your syrup doesn't mean you can't mix that with something else.
Totally.
Come on.
Totally.
I would
Yes.
make
I
a
mean, these
mezcal
flavors all
old-fashioned with
work really
this.
well together, I think. All right. So now on to the old fashioned.
Yes.
Now, what you're going to want to do is you can build this in the glass if you want. And if you're going to build it in the glass, you can add a half ounce of water to the drink. If you're going to build it in the mixing glass, leave the half ounce of water out. So let's just go with the mixing glass version. And so you're going to take your mixing glass, fill it halfway up with ice, add 2 ounces of bourbon. I like Elijah Craig's Toasted Barrel. It's kind of like my latest thing, but Old Forester is great. Any bourbon that you really love is going to work really well here. And then I take a third of an ounce, which works out to 2 teaspoons of banana simple syrup. You can add more if you like it a little bit sweeter. That's up to you. I like it right about there. It gets a little too sweet after a while. And then as far as the bitters go, I kind of have a rotation when it comes to the bitters. Now, you can do 2 dashes of black walnut bitters. I feel like that gets a little too bitter. Like it's like almost too much of a fine point.
Yep.
So what I'll do is I'll maybe do a dash of walnut and a dash of chocolate bitters, or Angostura bitters works just fine here. So 2 dashes or 2 tastes, but I'm going to caution you on black walnut bitters. A little goes a long way.
Yeah.
All right. So then you're going to stir that for 20 to 30 seconds in your mixing glass. Strain that over your nice big fat rock in your beautiful double rocks glass. And then again, if you want to garnish it. But this is like, so delicious as you enjoy your banana old fashioned.
Yeah. And I mean, it's so easy to put together, but yet so sophisticated. It's kind of why I like these so much.
And it's not like crazy sweet, sickly sweet.
No.
It's just got it's just nice little hints of, depending upon the bourbon you're using, kind of like a little caramel and the banana and a little kind of oaky, toasty. It's just so good. So lights out. And again, swap this into a rum old fashioned and man, you're off to the races there too.
Well, and one of the things I've actually started to do, and I think I'm going to do it for this upcoming party that I'm hosting. But you know how people do wine tastings, which is it's really fun, and you bring a bottle, and so what I find really fun, especially with a cocktail like this, you could also do it with a martini. Is you're using bourbon, right? So what if you made the same cocktail 4 times, but you used a different bourbon in each one, and you had them right by each other?
Yeah.
Just taste. And I feel like that's why an old fashioned is so great, is because you can really understand how to use your spirit this way.
Yeah. Well, also, you can play around with bitters. And so I have made an old fashioned bar, and Dash Fire, they gave us all those bitters.
Yeah.
And so I put out 4 different spirits. I put out an aquavit, I put out a tequila, I put out rum, and I put out bourbon.
Yep.
And then I had all of these different bitters flavors to try around and play with. And so that's another way to experiment with flavor. I would go with the same bourbon, and just if you want to just make a regular old fashioned, go with the same bourbon and then just try different bourbon flavors, like the cardamom bitters or orange bitters or Angostura. It's like just kind of play around. You'll really, it's amazing how easily it is to tune a drink based upon the bitters. There's so little there, but man, it makes such a big impact. So, all right, Jules, what are you making?
Okay, so I am going to be making a espresso style old fashioned. Okay, because who doesn't love a little coffee in their cocktails, right? It's like a much better espresso martini, in my opinion. So what we're going to do is we're going to do exactly what Brad did. We're going to grab out our mixing glass, okay? And to that, we're going to add in 1 ounce of chilled espresso. So you don't want it hot. You want it, you've already pulled your shot of espresso ahead of time. You could even do the, I know that for some people there's the espresso pods
Super
you can
easy.
do.
Yep.
But make sure it's espresso because you really do want that concentrated coffee flavor. I would argue if you have it, you could do a coffee concentrate here, but really and truly, the espresso is the best and you'll get a really good flavor that way. So we're going to do 1 ounce of our chilled espresso. We're going to do 2 ounces of bourbon. I used Elijah Craig here because I had it over the holidays and it's fantastic. But use what you like. Then easy, 1/2 ounce of Demerara syrup, which if you don't know what that is, it is just equal parts water and Demerara sugar. If you're in a bind, you don't have Demerara sugar, I would argue, and Brad, back me up here or don't, but to use a brown sugar and almost make a 2-to-1 a brown sugar syrup to sub Demerara sugar. What would you say to that?
I would say steer more towards maybe sugar in the raw.
Okay.
Because brown sugar it's just a much stronger flavor.
Yeah.
So that's my opinion.
Okay. Yeah. But I think that the Demerara really adds in that layer. So, just be fancy. Go get it. And you're making cocktails.
So you make brown drinks, like Demerara is just good sugar to use.
It is. Yeah. So we're doing 1/2 ounce of that. And then 2 dashes of pecan bitters and 1 dash of Angostura bitters. I like having that aromatic in there. Now, the pecan bitters, I think El Guapo, there's a shop here in San Diego, Collins and Coop. They have like a huge bitters like wall.
Yeah,
and it's
awesome.
great. So this is where, you can do pecan bitters, but I actually tried the Mission Fig fennel bitters from Dash Fire. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I know.
So good.
So good.
So I used that. It was fantastic. I've used it with the pecan bitters. It's great. I'm with Brad. The black walnut is a little aggressive. So maybe do 1 dash and then 2 dashes of the aromatic because it is a lot.
So 1 dash of the pecan bitters. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So it's up to you, but that's, and we'll get into this into the tip section about bitters and why we're using bitters and why it's so important, which we've talked about this before, but I feel like it's a good time to go back, beginning of the year, fresh start. Bitters, you can really have fun here. And I would argue that the bitterness of espresso paired with sweetness of bourbon, adding that level of sophistication with a flavored bitters really melds all of that together to make a very well-balanced old fashioned, in my opinion. So, follow this recipe the first time and then don't be scared to have fun with your bitters from there. But there you go. That's it. Oh, and then, you stir it. You add ice to your mixing glass, stir it up, pour it over into your rocks glass over a large ice cube, and then garnish with 3 coffee beans. Health, wealth, happiness. Always in coffee cocktails.
There you go.
Yep.
Lovely.
There you go.
Well, all right. So there's the cocktails. Let's get into the history behind whiskey, shall we?
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. This will be kind of fun.
I know.
Here
Excited.
we go.
I'm really excited about this because I feel like listeners who've been listening from the very early stages of our podcast are probably like, okay, we've done the old fashioned. What are we gonna talk about in the history section now? And I'm so excited that we're gonna talk about whiskey.
Yeah. I've been kind of saving this one, and this could be multiple episodes long. The history here.
Yeah. Well, we talked to Nate Ghana too about whiskey, and I mean, even that, just trying to.
It's
so
an
much
ocean of things to talk about. You'll never run out of things to talk
Yeah.
about when it comes to whiskey.
Yeah.
Really, any spirit, which is, again, why I love doing this, because you just never run out of things to say.
No, lots to talk about.
Well, in today's case, I want to get into the history of whiskey, but to do that, I want to set some context and just kind of get briefly into the history of alcohol.
Right.
And then we'll get into the birth of whiskey and then its migration to America. Okay. Which is meaty. And at the expense of running long on this, I thought about, breaking this up into two parts, but I'm like, you know what? Let's just get into it and go right out of the gate and get into just the backstory. So, all right, here's the deal on the history of alcohol. So Jules, what do you think is the oldest known alcoholic beverage?
Well, I mean,
Grand scheme of everything with alcohol in it, what's the oldest known?
I mean, I would think wine,
It's close.
but
It's beer.
I think it's beer.
It's beer.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So that's the oldest known fermented beverage, which anything that ferments creates alcohol. Anything that ferments with sugar creates alcohol. So as soon as we transitioned from being hunters and gatherers, I mean, we're talking like a long time ago, right? We became a little bit more agricultural based. We figured out how to make beer, and it was like an accident, they think, because we would eat something called gruel, which is taking grains and you boil it in water or milk, and that produces, like this rudimentary food that we would eat. Well, somebody left their bowl of gruel out at some point, and it got foamy, and wild yeasts that are in the air landed in the gruel, and they started to chew away at the sugars, and boom, you've got this like one brave soul who's like, hey, I'm really hungry. I wonder what this thing is that's all kind of foamy and looks like it might be moldy, but I don't even maybe know what mold is yet. So eats it, catches a buzz, and was like, well, that was cool. So I'm going to try that again and tell my friends about it. And then boom, you've got the invention of beer, right?
Yeah.
That's running around out there.
Yeah, we've never stopped being curious, have we?
No. Well, a few thousand years later, and by the way, so we're talking, this is like 13,000 years ago. That they discovered like the first remnants of beer, right? So now let's go a few thousand years forward, and now we're talking 9,000 years ago.
Sure.
And it was believed that early humans, while collecting berries, they noticed juice at the bottom of the container, and it would look and smell funny, and someone's like, well, I'm going to drink that. And catches a buzz. Thinks, all right, well, let's do that again. Tells their friends. Their friends are like, oh, my God, that's amazing. And then, poof, wine is born.
Yeah.
Right? Another 5,000 years goes by, and we get a little smarter, and we figured out how to purify liquids, right? Because, again, water wasn't always safe, right? There wasn't always clean water sources. So we figured out how to purify water and liquid, and that was mainly used for the purposes of creating medicine, balms, perfumes. And so now we're like in 2000 BC, and we figure out how to use or how to separate alcohol from water and to create this like stronger alcoholic beverage. And somebody drinks that and says, well, geez Louise, that was like awesome. Way better than beer, way better than wine. I'm hammered. Let's do this more often. And then so boom, distillation is born. And so by the 8th century AD, there's an Arabic alchemist named Abu Musa Jabir ibn Hayyan, and he invented the alembic pot still. Okay. Now this still, and because, he's literate and he documents this still becomes the still of choice for 1,000 years. And in fact, we still use Alembic stills in many applications, but we had not invented a better still for 1,000 years. So that wasn't until the 1800s. Maybe it was the 1700s. It was 1800s. All right. So this guy writes down how to make the still. And so now we've got documentation on this. Come across these Arabic texts. They rebuild the still. And a few hundred years later, distillation makes its way to Europe. All right. So now back in these days, we were mainly distilling fruits. So we found that wine, produced a nice buzz. Making beer was kind of a bit of a process. And so we would take wine or we would take apples or whatever, and we would distill that and create a spirit. And so now you've got like brandies and whatnot, right? Okay. So distillation migrates quickly from mainland Europe over to the British Isles, right? So that's what is known as kind of like Ireland, Northern Ireland, and whatnot, and then you've got like England and Scotland and Wales, right?
Right.
So specifically, it makes its way up to the Celtic region, which is now we're talking about Scotland and the Emerald Isle. All right.
Yep.
So monks are up there, and they are teaching.
The monks.
Here's the deal with the monks, right? Because the monks were literate, so not everybody could read and write. And so the monks could because, they had to read religious texts and stuff. So they're the ones that translated these Arabic texts.
Right.
And then these monks would then turn around and they would teach other people, right, how to read and write. But mostly that was taught to the nobility. So people who were wealthy came from the royal courts. They were the ones that got the benefit of education. The rest of us did not.
Right.
Okay. So the monks now are in possession of the distillation process, and there is also, at this time in the 13th century, a group of professional doctors and physicians. And this is from the McVeigh clan, who, interestingly, I don't know if there is some connection. They used to be monks, but obviously they're literate. So the McVeighs know how to distill alcohol as well. And so, they're running around the Celtic regions and teaching people how to do this and making spirits for people. Well, what they introduced was a kind of a novel concept, because what they said is like, hey, look, we don't have a lot of wine happening up here. We've got beer, lots of cider and stuff like that. So why don't we take the beer and let's distill that and see what we can make of that. And that is the earliest form of what soon became known as whiskey. And and so it was the McVeighs that taught the Celtics, not so much the monks, although there's a close relationship there, right?
Yeah.
That taught the Celtics how to make whiskey, although it wasn't called whiskey at the time. It was called aqua vitae.
Okay.
Yep. So aquavit, you're like, well, that sounds more like aquavit, which we talked about aquavit when we made glug, right?
Right.
Aquavit was, when it's just spelled like Vitae, right? It almost looks like aqua vitae. Aquavit is it's a Latin word that means water of life. And so the water of life is what people would call any kind of spirit, right? But they didn't speak Latin in these northern regions, right? They spoke Gaelic. And so when you take aqua vitae or water of life, and translate that into the Celtic language, it translates to uske ba or ishke ba, water of life. It looks like usij betha, right, in the native tongue. And eventually that gets shortened into whiskey.
Funny.
Yeah. So going back to, well, who invented whiskey? Was it the Scots or the Irish? Both lay claim to inventing whiskey. But we don't really know for sure which
I wouldn't want to get in
it
between
came from.
that fight. I would not want to.
No, that would just be a knockdown, drag out fight.
Wow. Yeah.
Clearly, there's a lot of passion over there, right?
Right.
Has nothing to do with the drunk.
Because I have heard that Scotch like whiskey was the first. I've heard that.
Well, yeah, because the Scots are like, we did it first, and the Irish are like, no, we did it first. And so What we do know is that in Ireland, we have the first record of consumption of aquavitae or aquaviti, and it is chronicled in the annals of Clon MacNois from 1405, which mentions a chieftain dying from taking too much of
Alcohol poisoning.
aquaviti. And it's actually written out as the Latin phrase. So at this point, they're still using Latin in 1405 to talk about this guy who got so drunk he died, right? And that's in Ireland. In Scotland, we have first record of production documented in 1495 by a letter from King James IV of Scotland, who granted Scottish monks a large amount of malt to make aquaviti in 1495. So Ireland says, hey, we have record that we consumed it first. Scotland said, yeah, but we've got record that we made it first. So obviously to consume it, somebody made it. We don't know if it was made in Scotland or if it was made in Ireland. I'm guessing because they were in Ireland when they drank it was probably made there. But
I know.
Didn't document a lot back then, right?
It's just crazy it was that long ago.
That long ago. But think about it. Like why isn't there good documentation on that? Well, again, like we're not literate. The monks are literate. Right? These physicians are literate, but everybody else not really literate. And so it's not like people are like writing it down like, this is my recipe, this is my recipe, So we have to go to what we see that's written, and these are a couple of historical documents that this shows up for the first time.
Wow. I got to go with the Irish.
I kind of feel like it could be the Irish too.
Yeah.
So now somewhere along the lines, it goes from being called Uskeba to Uske or Iskeba or Uskeba. Both were like depending upon which part of the Celtic language you subscribe to. Eventually gets formalized into the word whiskey. And in 1755, the word whiskey is formally added to the English lexicon by Dr. Samuel Jackson's dictionary. I'm sorry, did I say Jackson?
Yeah.
It's Dr. Samuel Johnson. Sam Jackson.
Sam Jackson.
Pulp Fiction. Is Marcellus Wallace a bitch? Whiskey, motherfucker. Say it. Say whiskey bar again. I dare you. I double dare you, motherfucker. Say whiskey bar again. Whiskey, man, whiskey. So, Dr. Samuel Johnson's dictionary. So 1755, the word whiskey is formalized. Okay, so we've established that where whiskey got its name from, and we haven't quite established like who invented it first, Scotland or Ireland.
Right.
And we'll never know, right?
We'll never know.
What we will tell you is what I can tell you is this, that whiskey from Scotland and whiskey from Ireland are two very different styles of whiskey.
100%.
In fact, you can't call it Irish whiskey if it doesn't come from Ireland.
Uh-huh.
And you can't call it Scotch whiskey if it doesn't come from Scotland.
Uh-huh.
Now
it's
they
like
say
champagne.
It's like champagne, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Anything outside of champagne is
Sparkling.
Yeah.
Cuvée,
Sparkling or champagne, method noir, or what is it? Method champois. I can't fuck, my words are brutes. Yeah, these words are escaping me right now. So
yeah.
Anyways, so the difference in flavor and the way they're made is significant. So people will say Irish whiskey, which is triple distilled, is smoother and lighter, and Scotch whiskey, which is double distilled, is heavier and more full-bodied, right? Like it's got a little bit more weight to it.
Is it a little peaty?
Well, it can be a little peaty, right?
Peaty,
Not all
big
Scotch
peat.
whiskey is peaty, and we'll get into that another day, like just the differences in Scotch whiskey. So Scotch whiskey is made only with malted grains, and malted means that, the grain has been sprouted a little bit, right? And then they knock that sprout off and they dry it out, and then they use that to create the flavor profile for Scotch. Irish whiskey doesn't have to actually have malted grains in it. It can have any kind of number of grains, including corn. All right, now let's talk about whiskey coming to America.
Right.
All right.
Because it can't. So you have your Irish whiskey and you have your Scotch. American whiskey, we don't know about it. It hasn't been there yet. These are the first two. Now we go across the sea. Okay.
So now the migration is happening to the New World. So the Scottish and the Irish, they're coming to America, and they're bringing with them the knowledge of distillation. And they're also bringing the knowledge of, like, how they fermented grains and whatnot. And so they get here and they start planting their grains. And so if you remember, if you listen to episode 95, where we talked about the hot buttered rum, we went into the history behind what America's first spirit was. And it wasn't whiskey. We were really drinking rum because, again, like Scottish and Irish, like, we know how to distill.
Yep.
So naturally other people know how to distill as well. And sugar and then molasses are coming up out of the Caribbean in shiploads. And we're just like, hey, we're going to take this and we're going to turn it into rum.
Right.
Well, then War of Independence breaks out. Stops the trade coming from the Caribbean, and everybody's looking around like, well, what do we do now? And the Irish and the Scotch are like, I got you covered, guys. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to take these crops that we've been growing, which we've been making whiskey this whole time. You were just too interested in your rum, and we're going to start drinking this now. And America's like, yes, that's great. We love this. This is delicious. We love this so much. So they are making whiskey, and it is a valuable commodity, and like, it's used as payments in some cases. And so after the war ends, George Washington says, hey, you know what we need to do here, folks, is we need to tax the whiskey. And that turns out to be not a very popular decision.
Of course not. It increases the price.
Well, yeah, and the Scotch and the Irish are like, hey, this is kind of bullshit.
Yeah.
So
well, right.
we don't want to do that. Like, we don't want to pay taxes. We left. Like, we had this war over taxes, and like the whole War of Independence, it wasn't about like not paying your taxes. It was just the overtaxation from England, but now you have to run this country. So Washington's like, yeah, no, we're going to tax the whiskey. Now, I'm not going to get too far into the Whiskey Rebellion because that will just take the story down a path that'll take forever. However, if you want to listen to a great history on the Whiskey Rebellion, which is actually how I found our friend Dawn Brody from the Hilf podcast, go back and listen to her episode on the Whiskey Rebellion. And they even talk about making cocktails in there.
Oh, no way.
Totally. Yeah. So go back, listen to the Whiskey Rebellion there. It's actually a lot of fun. It's funny.
Yeah.
So the Whiskey Rebellion happens. Like, we end up like irritating the Scotch and the Irish. So they're like, you know what? Pennsylvania sucks. Maryland sucks. We're out of here. We're going to go into the hills of Kentucky and Tennessee and down to the Carolinas. And so these Scots and these Irish people, they go up into the hills and they bring with them their traditions, their fiddles, their songs, and all the other things that they, know how to do, like distillation. So they settle into Kentucky and they settle into Tennessee. And they're in Bourbon County, and they're making whiskey there. And pretty soon, they're making good whiskey. And the whiskey is so good there because of the limestone that's in the ground. It creates natural, like, filtration for the water. So the water's so good. And the bourbon now, or the whiskey, because right now is just whiskey, they're putting it in barrels to ship it down the Ohio River, then down the Mississippi, getting into Louisiana and all parts of the United States. And that whiskey ends up becoming even more flavorful because it's sitting in barrels.
Yeah.
And so now whiskey starts to be called by name coming from this region. They say, hey, give me some of that old bourbon whiskey. And boom, the legend of bourbon whiskey is established.
But where did the word bourbon come from?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, that's
a great question. I would love to tell you.
Thanks to the French. So
Ooh,
it was named after King Louis, who comes from the House of Bourbon. So that's where Bourbon County gets its name.
Okay.
Yeah.
From the French.
From the French. Thank you very much for the Louisiana purchase. You are welcome, Americans.
You are my favorite person in the world.
That was more like Spanish. But
Yes.
you are welcome, my American friends. Here, I'll take Kentucky, and you will call this place Bourbon.
Yes. No, I love the French, and
the France. Love the France.
Love
the France.
So that's great. I didn't know that. King Louis, huh? Yeah.
So King Louis. Yep. So they, so now bourbon's been established up in Kentucky. However,
yes,
Kentucky is not the only place that's making bourbon, right? And they're making good bourbon. Tennessee also has the benefit of this limestone that's creating this wonderfully flavored water, or lack thereof, I should say, this wonderfully filtered water that makes really good whiskey. So Tennessee is in the whiskey game too. And they've got a special kind of whiskey there, which is actually a lot like bourbon. And I'll talk about the differences in a minute. But one thing about bourbon is that bourbon can be made anywhere in the United States, not just Bourbon County, Kentucky.
Okay.
Tennessee whiskey can only be made in Tennessee. So they have a very particular way that they like to see their whiskey made. Now, you've got Tennessee whiskey, you've got bourbon whiskey. There's another whiskey that we're famous for here in the United States, and this one's just kind of made all over. And this is rye whiskey. Rye grows really, really well.
I'm such a rye person right now. I love it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, rye is like it's spicier, right?
Yeah.
It's where bourbon's a little bit sweeter.
Yeah.
And Tennessee whiskey is a little bit more, it's got a little bit more kind of like a charcoal, like a toasty flavor to it. So rye whiskey, I happen to like a blended whiskey profile in my old fashioned. So I'll take bourbon and rye and oftentimes put them together. And if you want to go back and make the banana old fashioned that way, I highly recommend you do it. I got no problems making Tennessee whiskey old fashions because it doesn't have to be bourbon that is in an old fashioned. It can be really any spirit.
Would you think that Tennessee whiskey is more sweet than bourbon?
No, bourbon is more sweet than.
Would you say
Tennessee
bourbon
whiskey.
is the sweetest?
Bourbon is the sweetest. So yeah, here's the deal. So let me kind of break down the differences in whiskeys. So in what was then Bourbon County in Kentucky, and again, eventually, you could make bourbon anywhere in the United States. So they use a very specific mash bill, which must be at least 51% corn.
Right.
Okay. Then the balance of that is made up between barley, wheat, and or rye. Not all three, could be. Sometimes it could be just one or two, right? But it's barley, wheat, and or rye makes up the rest of the 49%.
Right.
Then what you do for bourbon whiskey is you age it in charred new oak barrels for at least 2 years. And then it gets put into a barrel at no more than 62.5% ABV or 125 proof. And it must be bottled at least 40% ABV, which is 80 proof, right? So they cut it with water, or they could just throw it in there at kind of like full proof, and you've got like this hot bourbon and you're working with, and you're trying to kind of cut it with a little water in your glass. So these conditions must be met for a whiskey to be called bourbon, which gives it its flavor profile of being sweet, oaky, a little vanilla, maybe a little caramel, among other flavors, which is why that goes so well with banana.
Yeah.
So now we've got Tennessee whiskey, Tennessee whiskey shares the same characteristics as bourbon. So the same mash bill, everything else is pretty much the same, except after distilling, it must be filtered through maple charcoal prior to aging. And of course, it must be made in Tennessee. And this gives it a flavor profile of also being sweet, but now you've got this charcoal and you've got this oak. Tennessee whiskey and bourbon whiskey both are sweet, but then you've got rye, which is unlike either one of those. And the mash bill here must be at least 51% rye, not 51% corn, and the rest is a mix of corn and barley. Like Tennessee and bourbon, it is aged in charred new oak barrels. It must be be in those barrels for at least 2 years, and then put into the barrel at no more than 62.5% ABV or 125 proof.
And Brad, you have this all written out on the notes, right?
I do.
So I'm a visual. Why don't we add this to the website so people can, it's almost like
a
you know,
chart.
when you compare iPhone phones and you're like, well, this one has this,
Oh,
but
totally.
this one doesn't have
Yeah.
this.
No, it's
We
like
should
to
do
keep
that.
track of all this is so hard. So just think
Yeah.
about it this way. You got Tennessee whiskey, bourbon whiskey, pretty much the same.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Except Tennessee whiskey, you've got this thing about going through charcoal filter.
Right.
You don't have that in bourbon. And Tennessee's got to be made in Tennessee.
In Tennessee.
Right.
Yeah, right.
So even though the water comes through the limestone, it's beautiful water, that's not a requirement.
Okay.
Okay. Rye whiskey, 51% mash bill must be rye,
Right.
not corn.
Right.
Which is why bourbon and Tennessee whiskey is sweet because of the corn. The rye is spicier. And so that's why the rye whiskey is got the rye mash bill. Okay.
And are we the only ones who really went down this rabbit hole of Now you have rye. Now you have single malt. Now you have a American blended whiskey.
No, it was Scotch. That was the Scotch and the Irish.
They did that as well.
They did that as well. Yeah.
Okay.
But they used a different profile over there because the grains grew
Right.
they're not all universal, right? So some
Right.
grains grow better in certain environments than others. Now, everything that they use there, turns out we kind of use that here with a little bit of a variation. There's like a 6-row wheat or something like that, which is different than what they use over there. However, they took that knowledge, they took their crops, they came here and started planting those crops here. And so we took it a step further and said, well, you got the rye whiskey, you got the Tennessee whiskey, and you got the bourbon whiskey. In Scotland, they've got Scotch. In Ireland, they got Irish whiskey. Irish whiskey uses corn.
Right.
Scotch does not use corn.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Was it used again? You told me this.
Yeah, it's like malted barley.
Malted barley. That's right. Mm-hmm. It's just there's so much from what came from, you know what I mean? Like there's so many variations now, which I get it. You want to level up each time and expand and then you can go down the deeper rabbit hole of, well, what barrels is it aged in and where are the wood from? Are you using this kind
American oak in the case of
for bourbon.
Bourbon and Tennessee.
Must be. It has to be.
Yep. Has to be. So now here's another fun little thing. If you ever notice, there's 2 different spellings on whiskey. There's whiskey with an EY and whiskey without an E. It's just whiskey with a Y. Mm-hmm. The reason there's 2 different spellings, and what you'll find is usually it lines up somehow that countries with an E in their spelling seem to have whiskey EY, where countries without an E in their spelling go with the whiskey Y. And I thought that was kind of like the rule, but it's not. It's just there's no hard and fast rule on what whiskey is called in one country or how it's spelled in one country versus another. It's just how they prefer to do it.
Yeah.
And Scotland, Ireland, and America aren't the only countries making whiskey. You've got Canadian whiskeys, right?
Yeah.
You've got Japanese whiskeys, which are like, I'm sorry, they are doing some I love the Japanese and just the dedication they have to process. Not saying that we don't, and the Canadians don't, the Irish don't, the Scotch don't. I mean, obviously, you created a amazing product, right? But the Japanese just take it to a new level. There's something about them that's just amazing.
I know.
But then you've got whiskey that comes from India, and there's whiskey that's coming out of Southeast Asia. So whiskey's kind of like coming from all over the place now, thanks to the Scotch and the Irish.
Right. I mean, it came from them too. It was funny. I just did a really wonderful campaign with Monkey Shoulder over the holidays, and one of my corrections, going through the brand was I just instinctually spelled it whiskey with an E. And so that was one of the comments they made. They said, will you change every time you say whiskey, will you change it to no E, just a Y? And I got to be honest with you, Brad, it looks weird. It looks weird without the E. And maybe because we're English writers and
maybe
speakers.
to those in Scotland, it looks weird with an E.
I know. But isn't that funny? It just looks better with an E, in my opinion.
Well, thanks to the Scotch and the Irish, so
we wouldn't
don't
be
be too hard on them. Don't be too hard on them.
No,
So,
honestly,
thanks,
I love
guys.
that we at least know that it came from them. And you know what?
Yes, 100% came from there.
Why couldn't they have both created it? Maybe around the same time. Why does it have to be one or the other? Why can't it just be both?
Well, I mean, I think you've got the Scotch and you got
Pride.
the Irish who are proud
Pride.
of their homeland, right? They're proud of their countries.
Yeah.
So both are known for their whiskeys, and one is just a little bit more adamant than the other. What's interesting is, so the Scotch whiskey is made with a certain kind of old style. I think it's the Allenbeck pot still.
Yeah.
Where Irish whiskey came up with, hey, you know what? It doesn't have to be in this still. We're going to use the coffee still. So the coffee still you may have heard of before. I told you we weren't going to go down this path, but here I am going down this path.
Here we are. Yeah.
Was invented by an Irish guy with the last name Coffee. And he figured out a way to make distillation more efficient. So it's a column still, right? Where the Allenbeck is, it's more of a pot still. And so you can get a higher proof out of this column still, and you can do more distillations in a single run versus having to run and rerun in a pot still. And so he brought this idea first to the Scots, and the Scots were like, nah, we'll not use that still. No. We're going with the old ways. We make the whiskey, and you can take your column still and stick it up your ass. You know? And so I was like, fine.
That was pretty good. You kind of sounded like Shrek there.
Fine, you bastards. We're just going back here to Ireland, and we're going to make the whiskey even sweeter and smoother and faster and more efficient, and we're going to make lots of money while you struggle and get shut down by the government.
Brad, I think those are your two best accents. I'm not kidding. Those are your two best. My favorite, thanks. Personally. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's not really how we sound, you stupid American. Sorry.
I like it. Hey, we're a little Scottish and Irish, okay?
Well, I am more Irish, your side of the family, which, obviously Nana was married more than once. So your lineage comes from Scotland and France. My lineage comes from Ireland, Germany, and Poland.
Sutton.
Sutton. It's probably even like, I don't know. My dad said we were Irish, but Sutton is such an English name. But there are, there's Sutton County in Ireland, so I don't know. I should do the 23andMe, but I don't know.
They'll steal your data.
I know. Pretty soon I'll be being linked to crimes I didn't commit.
Right. Yeah. And now that you're mayor, we can't have that.
No. Geez Louise. Yeah. No.
We'll take the bourbon. Yeah, we'll just take the bourbon and the whiskey. But no, Brad, that was, I feel like you put a whole lot into a short amount of time. And I know that there's probably so many other little gems and history nuggets, but I think that was pretty well done for our history section for the history of whiskey. Because I know that there are rabbit holes we can go down to of like,
oh my God, tons.
Well, why was rye discovered? Why did they feel this and was, so I think you did a great job on the history of whiskey. I'm just glad to know that we know where it stemmed from and that beer was the first spirit and how it trickled down. And it honestly, it just spiraled. We saw a good thing.
And smarter. Yeah. And smarter. And smarter.
Yeah. We tasted a good thing and we really ran with it. And look at us now.
Look at us now. We're doing podcasts and this stuff. All right.
Yeah. Now we're talking about it.
Well, we got tips, and we've got to also, I think we're going to reveal next week's drink, too, in the tips section, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Uh-huh.
That's right. I got it. Well, all right. So let's jump in and do it.
Okay. So we'll keep it short and sweet because we have talked about bitters before. I want to say it was like maybe our first episode of the Old Fashioned. We might have done bitters.
It's out there somewhere.
I mean, we're almost on our 100th episode.
Yeah, this is episode 99.
Yeah. So. Like we're not messing around here. Mm-hmm. So, okay, I thought we could go back to bitters just quickly. Here's what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to tell you what bitters you should use because there are so many bitters out there. I will tell you, I think there's 3 you should start with, which is the aromatic bitters, orange bitters, and Peychaud's bitters. Go out and have those 3. Other than that, go out and if you see a flavor you want to try and you think would be good in a cocktail like an old fashioned, go out and get it. Essentially what bitters is an extremely concentrated flavor that has alcohol in it. It's one of the reasons why we love it's the Trinidad sour, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good one. But it's bitter. And it's one of the reasons why in a lot of cocktails outside of the Trinidad sour, you only need a dash or 2 because it is such a concentrated flavor. So the tip is to understand why we use bitters. And I'm going to quickly rattle off my notes here. Why use bitters? They're a flavor enhancer. The bitters can add balance and complexity by accentuating flavors already present. They add versatility to your cocktails. As we're in January, it's a great way to have a low ABV drink. I add this with grapefruit juice, sparkling water, and dashes of aromatic bitters. It's just extremely versatile. And you can customize it. So you can do 1 dash with 2 dashes of a different flavor. So it's one of the reasons why we use bitters is to explore flavor. Now, how do we use bitters? We measure our bitters in dashes, typically 1 to 3 dashes. We do this when we're either stirring or shaking a cocktail for even distribution, like all of our ingredients usually when we're making them in a mixing glass or a cocktail shaker. Now, here is what the last two notes that I have here are I think the most important. Bitters balance flavors. It balances sweetness. It can balance the acidity, and it can also balance the alcohol strength. Okay, so a dash of Angostura bitters can help tame the sweetness of an old fashioned, right? If you're using bourbon and a sweet simple syrup, that Angostura bitters will add a bitter flavor that can help balance that. And the last thing is the notes, right? So pair bitters with the flavor profile of a cocktail, like orange bitters in a citrus style, a sea style martini. I've done recently. I made a coastal martini and I used orange bitters, and it just really brought out the flavor. Grapefruit bitters you can add to a Paloma. There's some really great ways to help accent the notes already in your cocktail. Last thing I'm going to say, if you're curious, what cocktails do I start with to use my bitters? Old Fashioned, Manhattan, Negroni, Sazerac. I would say those are my top. But those are my notes for bitters, quickly, how to use them, why we use them. Brad, do you have any comments, questions, concerns?
Yeah. So I would say that the Sazerac is supposed to be with Peychaud's, but any kind of Peychaud style, I guess, doesn't always have to be Peychaud's. And I would say that you nailed it. No, that's good. I don't really have anything else to add. I had something and I forgot what it was, so it can't be that important.
Because I think when you realize what cocktails you need them in, you taste them. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't want an old fashioned without Angostura in there, because again, it balances. So I wouldn't even say try to.
I made an old fashioned without Angostura.
Really?
It doesn't. Yeah, an old fashioned doesn't have to use Angostura. Like we just talked about this.
No,
well,
no,
like
no,
Mission
no,
Fig
no.
Fennel and yeah.
No, I'm saying with no bitters at all.
Oh no.
No.
Yeah, I agree. Well, it can't be called an old fashioned if it doesn't have bitters in it.
Right.
So that's what an old fashioned cocktail is.
Right. Because I was
Spirit,
like, well,
bitters,
maybe
sugar,
try it
water.
without. But then it's like, don't waste your time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So definitely use bitters in your old fashioned, but play around with the bitters. I would start with, if you're going to buy bitters for the first time, get Angostura. And if you're like, but I want to buy more than one, then fine, go get an orange bitters.
Yeah.
And if you're like, but I still want to buy another one, if you want to try Sazerac, go get a Peychaud's bitters, right? And if you have those three in your stable, then go explore.
Yeah.
But
And
don't start with obtuse and weird first.
Right.
Right. Like,
Yeah. Like you're cooking. Yeah. Chocolate and espresso go together. Get chocolate bitters. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. Grapefruit and tequila go together. Get grapefruit bitter. You know, like use. Yeah. Oh, I have a tip.
Okay.
Go get a book. Go on Amazon. It's called The Flavor Bible.
Yes.
There you will understand what would go with what. If you're like, well, I want to get weird, use the wheel. Use the flavor wheel.
Yep,
what
just like the color wheel.
Yeah. So that's bitters. I think that's good for people to reflect on as we ease out of dry January, and you want to just sip on some bitters. Then you can taste them. Yeah.
Yeah. Plus they're medicinal. Turns out Angostura bitters actually makes your stomach feel good.
Yeah.
I use it all the time. All right.
Anyway.
Next week.
Coming up
next week, we are going to get into the sex on the beach, which I swore I'd never make this cocktail again.
Yet here we are.
But it was popular for a reason, and there's a right way to make it, and it's actually pretty good. So go, Jules. You are gonna think about what that riff is on the Sex on the Beach between now and then.
Yeah.
But if you want to make a Sex on the Beach, and why not? Why wouldn't you?
Hey.
Go get some vodka. Go get some peach schnapps. Go get some orange juice. Go get some fresh oranges and stuff. You're gonna want to make some fresh orange juice. That's just the best way to go. Just make fresh orange juice.
Yeah.
And then cranberry juice as well. What we'll use, and that's not next week. It's actually gonna be in 2 weeks. And then when you get the cranberry juice, don't get the cranberry juice cocktail that already has sugar in it. You want to just get regular cranberry juice. So yeah, unsweetened. All right. So that's next week. Not next week. That's in 2 weeks. And
Yep.
we will see you guys then.
Yeah.
Ta-ta.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.